Welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast, where we hold interesting conversations about learning with a range of thought leaders, BCEN certification holders, and industry professionals. Our goal is to create value and insight for you, our professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. We hope you find our discussions interesting, informative, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, and always worth your time.
In this podcast episode, we want to introduce you to our BCEN friend, Courtney Edwards. From a true passion for trauma care to leading the way in injury prevention, Courtney shares a few of her lessons learned, how to grow trust, accountability, and true collaboration. This episode is called A National Treasure in Injury Prevention.
Hi, I'm Holly Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCEN and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Dexter, Director of Professional Development at BCEN. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Holly.
In this episode of BCEN and Friends, we have Courtney Edwards. If you've ever wondered what it's like to have over 1 million people depending on your skills, expertise, and compassion, then look no further than our guest today. She is keeping things on track and moving forward for her community. Michael, could you please introduce us to our BCEN friend, Courtney?
Holly, actually, this episode has been a long time coming because I met Courtney when she taught an advanced trauma care for nurses class and did a fabulous job, and I've always respected her a lot. And we should have had her on this podcast a long time ago. So I'm glad that we're here today. Courtney is the Director of Trauma Community Outreach and BioTel EMS at Parkland Health in Dallas, Texas. Courtney leads injury prevention and outreach programs, working to improve EMS services for over 2.4 million people in the Dallas area, and supports 14 EMS agencies and oversees an annual 260,000 EMS 911 calls. Holding her doctoral degree in nursing practice from Texas Christian University and a Master of Public Health, she remains patient-facing by providing direct care as a member of the trauma team in Dallas. Courtney, welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Wow, thank you for inviting me and letting me join you all.
Yeah, well, we're excited to learn more about you and learn from all of the knowledge that you have. And I guess before we dive into the world of trauma care, maybe you could just let us know a little bit more about what led you into nursing to begin with and how you ended up in this role that you have today.
So I always knew nursing was something that interested me. I like the science, the technicality of things, but then I also liked being around people. And so when I was in high school, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I applied to programs around the United States looking for programs that were well respected in nursing. When I applied, we used to get back the thick books of all their course. The course catalog used to be all paper. And when you got accepted to the college, they would send you the course catalog as well. And so I just knew I wanted to go into nursing. I knew I wanted to go out and see part of the world. And so I took all those books up. We had a little landing overlooking our living room in our house, and I took them up and threw them over the edge. And the ones that landed face up, I took back up until it was between Emory, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Baylor. So Baylor won. I came to Texas, did my undergraduate and got my bachelor's of nursing at Baylor, and then joined the critical care trauma nurse internship at Parkland Hospital, which was an 8-month ICU ER internship. And so had the pleasure of rotating through all the ICUs, the surgical ICU, medical ICU, cardiovascular, trauma, and the ED. Worked in the ER after that for a little while, and then migrated into trauma. And trauma has been my home since 2005. It's grown, it's changed, but it is my home. And I think the role of being voluntold has come into play a few times as to what has eventually led me up here. But I like challenges. I like trying things new. And so, entering into and joining EMS, I never thought would be in my future, helping the frontline paramedics across multiple of our suburban cities, but it's been fun, big learning curve. But I think just being open to what is coming is huge. And I think what so many nurses experience is you never quite end up where you think you're going to go, and to look for those ideas that are coming at you.
I find it super interesting that you were like, I'm going to leave something to chance. Like, I'm going to toss the books off the railing, and whichever ones are face up, well, then that's what we're going with. So sometimes I feel like that is kind of a part, an aspect of trauma care, is that there is sometimes just this roll of the dice,
Mhm.
the perfect meeting of all of these overlapping circumstances that really are, it's just like, I'm not saying they're by chance, because I do strongly believe, as I know you do, that education, knowledge, wisdom, training, all of that is vitally important to doing a great job for trauma patients. But I also feel there is like this percentage of just the roll of the dice,
Mhm.
things coming at you, and it happens or it doesn't happen. And so I like that you included that in part of your nursing journey. It's just like, sometimes you're gonna just see what the roll of dice turns to. I think that part of your personality probably makes it easier to embrace sometimes the chaos and the unknown and the chance happenings that I'm sure often have to come up in your line of work.
Yeah, it's funny you put it that way. I'm always, and I've got 3 little boys, and one of them's 14, and we were a freshman in high school. And so I try this conversation about, sometimes I think we get too wrapped up in some of the things and don't have enough confidence and grace with ourselves to know that we can make this happen. What school I pick isn't going to make or break my career, because so much of that is on me as a person and how I'm going to grow or adapt. And then I was also of the mindset, if I go somewhere and I hate it, that you go somewhere else. The finality of things sometimes, and that is 100% trauma, because we see life and death in a blink of an eye all the time from trauma. And so I think recognizing that, the decisions that we make, the life that we lead, is not always that final, that we can keep pushing it.
I love the way that you are not only living that, but you're teaching your sons like how to do that well. I think you make about 35,000 decisions a day. So can we expect that all of them are going to be perfect? I think the answer is probably no. And so to be able to recognize that we'll get a chance to choose again, or really relying on, hey, if this doesn't work, we'll go with something else. And to your point, that can definitely be applied in the realm of trauma and professionally. And honestly, just looking at your advanced degrees, your specialty certifications, I can tell that you value education, professional growth. Like, that's a huge part of your legacy so far. But what do you feel helps you stay motivated to be that lifelong learner? And then if you could also kind of touch on, like, how can you help to pass that down to people that you're connected with professionally, whether that be your coworkers, people you're mentoring, colleagues, and people you come in contact with?
So I think early in my career, I started taking all the classes because I didn't like the unsettled feeling in my head and my body when I didn't know or have an idea of what was going to happen. For example, as an ER nurse, a new ER nurse, we had a patient deliver in a waiting room bathroom. And we are an adult only emergency department. And being given this newborn baby by a visitor who happened to go into the bathroom and said, "Oh, look what we found," that scared the living daylights out of me. And I know that, we had education and training in school, and but I was like, okay, I didn't like that feeling and having to always trust your coworkers and your peers. And I'm like, I want to be a better nurse for you all so I can be a better team member. That's where some of that dedication to education and trying to go and learn and hone my practice really started coming from. I didn't like that. And then I think as I've grown in my career, I realized that it's a gift to learn from someone else and to take a piece of their passion. And so like when I go to the BCEN conferences or the ENA and I'm picking my online education, I always go to the things that I don't routinely do, so I can get a little piece of that passion that other people have and recognize that, as a human being on this planet, one of the greatest things that we have is that thinking and learning and being able to be open to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great response, Courtney. And it reminds me a lot of my early nursing. I would have a situation come up and I'd say, this is the last time I want to feel this bad. I do not want to feel this uncomfortable again in my life. And then seeking out the opportunities for it. And I think it's really good when people recognize where their deficiencies are and look to fill those in rather than just be okay with living with them. And you mentioned early on in this podcast, you said trauma has changed. I don't know if that's exactly how you said it, but you said, over the years, trauma has changed a little bit. And I know there's been different focuses on injury prevention. There's been legislation. There's so much that we could go down in the world of trauma. But what are some of the ways you've seen it change? And how do you recognize that there's topics that really all nurses need, not just the ones you and I are passionate about, but real gaps that you feel that nurses should really focus on right now in the world of trauma care?
So I think an underappreciated role is in of course, the injury prevention. I'm going to go injury prevention because that is one of my passions. But I think also in the patient education sphere, I think that sometimes we get a little too focused on completing our tasks, going in, getting our vitals, doing our reassessments, giving our medications. And we don't use that time to talk with our patients, with their families, and giving them that education to perhaps keep them from the hospital the next time. Same thing with discharge instructions. We all have benchmarking metrics. How quickly from that discharge order to out the door can we get individuals? And I think we miss an opportunity for that education. And I think that even this is one of the big changes, that we have a greater role in that education, I think, than has ever happened before. And there is so much information out there available to people, but what's the message I want my person to hear? And what is most important? I think that's one of the big changes. One of the little changes is I used to give a whole heck of a lot of LR, and that doesn't happen anymore. And that's not just because of the IV shortage. The focus on blood, the transition to the importance of blood resuscitations, the importance of whole blood resuscitation versus component-based resuscitation is just one of the technical skills that has also kind of changed and evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I used to work at EMS, it was any trauma patient was 2 large bore IVs, full blown LR. And as soon as the bag was empty, you started another one. And it didn't really matter how much they got, as long as it was going wide open the entire way to the hospital. Yeah. And we've definitely seen that change. And, there's a lot of focus on adapting different technologies and things, but I like what you're saying about the real basics of getting down with a patient or an individual that's there for care and educating them. And that can go so far. Sometimes we look at the flashy objects of new devices and things brought in, and we think that that's where we need to focus. And in some ways we do, but in other ways, I think just being personal with people can make such an impact. And, you also have taught a lot of courses, and you're still continuing to teach. I mentioned, one of those at the beginning, but are you still seeing that there is an increased interest in nurses for that trauma education? Is it just as much as ever, or you feel like it's more than before? Because we hear a lot of conversation about, the young generation or the new nurses or these things. How do you feel as an educator, how people are being receptive to trauma education in the nursing world?
There's absolutely a need for education, and I don't see that going away. But I do see a shift in how we're delivering that education and what type of education we are needing to give. I love teaching the classes that have the skill-based learning. Virtual, we love it. It's the convenience of virtual education. And I've taken the opportunity to attend education, have education that wouldn't be available otherwise because of the virtual option. But then there's also that in-person focus that is just a different level of bonding between the instructor and the student. And it gives the ability to really see in your students, are they grasping the information? Is it connecting? Is it making sense to them? Because we all have different ways to explain things. The way I may describe cardiogenic shock is very different than how you, Michael, describe it. And Holly may gravitate more towards your way versus my way. And it's just the way her brain is wired. And so I think sometimes we miss that with the virtual education. So I think that group conversation is always there and important. And I also think that the informal education, the learning that happens in the trauma room with your peers, what questions are they asking? What is the prompting that is coming forward that you're seeing? And right now, the blurring of lines sometimes. So, pre-hospital transfusions is huge. We're actually getting ready to roll out blood to one of our EMS agencies. But taking things out of the hospital and into the different areas, taking things out of the ICU and putting it down in the ED, blurring these lines as to, telehealth. These are all tools to us, and how we can make these tools work for us in our workflows, I think, is some of the education that we're going to need. Not just what is this tool and how does it benefit patients, but having that side by side, that peer learning to say, hey, this is how you take this tool and make it easier for your life.
I think one of the cores of what you mentioned, not only when you talked about patient discharge and like individualizing that, but also then looking at education, not as just this blanket, this model is going to work for every concept and everything, but saying like, there are some things that we can do virtually and that will be good. And it'll probably reach to the majority. There are some things that we're never going to be able to do that way. And then there are other things that really it's going to happen in the moment with the patients. And that's going to be where the learning really happens. And I think getting out of kind of the drawn box that I often feel like people just, they want to check that box. They want to get that done. And yet that box doesn't mean anything. So like, if it doesn't mean anything and it's checked, is there any value to it? And I think you basically encapsulated that there is a need for education, but perhaps what we need to do is really sit with the idea that it's not all going to be able to be given in one format and in one, piece, one moment of time. Some of it's going to have to be spread out and really, pared down to the learner. So I love that. And you mentioned the EMS rollout that y'all are about to do with blood. I think that's awesome. I've seen just some different research. We might have to have a follow-up on that. But as a nurse who's worked in the trauma bay and with trauma patients before, I can 100% say that working in the trauma team it's a team sport. It's not really an individual undertaking. I certainly have never seen one person trying to run around and do everything, because they would be just yelling for help. But in thinking about that, how a really cohesive team is needed for every trauma patient that comes in, like what strategies would you say that have been implemented by yourself, by the team in your ED and your trauma teams to help kind of implement that team mindset or the multidisciplinary collaboration? And if you have kind of any specifics that you could give us, whether that be challenges or things that you did, so that anyone listening, maybe they have some key takeaways that they can bring back to, their trauma care.
Yeah. So bad teams work together in the same place. Good teams work together. And that's where I think we really try to stress. One of the things we just segued from an education topic into team building and team dynamics. Lots of times people think in order to be a better nurse, I need to learn how to take care of patients better. And that translates into understanding disease patterns and processes and interventions. Lots of times we forget that team dynamic, that self-reflection, that working together. Lots of people would call them soft skills, but I really think of them as essential skills. How do you talk to one another? That's one of the things that we have seen an evolution in with the electronic health record is people don't have to have face-to-face. My provider can enter orders in on a patient and send me messages through the EHR to my phone, and I will never talk to this person. And I think that learning how to have that communication, being able to trust your team members, I think is critical. And by building trust, you have to respect and know one another. Doesn't mean I have to like you, but means I have to respect you and respect your judgment. How respect is built is based off accountability. If a patient outcome is not optimal, the whole team comes together and said, hey, this is what happened to this patient. How could we handle this better in the next time? And not saying, you didn't document your pain reassessment, you didn't order your titration correctly, you didn't do the procedure correctly, but really think about it from that higher look into what is going on with the patient. And so I think how we build those teams is having that transparency, focusing on the accountability, respecting one another, and then building that trust also comes with getting to know one another and knowing who is who. And so, one of the little things that we have is we're an academic teaching. So the residents rotate, and there's a sign that has the resident name with their picture. And so that way you can put a name to a face. So just knowing who people are. We had a new intern that rotated on our service. It was her first time ever on trauma service. She came up to the nurses the other day and she's like, hi, my name is so-and-so. It's so good to see you. I am your intern today. If you need anything, let me know. I'm going to be asking you a lot. And so I was like, big props to her for reaching out and introducing yourselves. And then I found that the nurses were much more open and could feel like you could approach that individual. I think as a leader, I try to round very frequently so that way people can see my face. And those informal conversations are just as important as those formal conversations. I know people get busy. You want to come to work, you want to do your job, you want to enjoy your passion, you want to go home. But sometimes lingering for 15 minutes and talking about each other's kids or what happened this past week can help build those relationships. So it's less hard to have some of those hard conversations that I think we need to do. I know it sounds kind of simplistic and not like the genius idea, but I think it does go back to that basic and those foundations and being able to be together.
Yeah, those are really good points, Courtney. I've seen that quite a bit. It seems like the nurses that come in, they clock in, they do their job, they don't really interact. And as soon as the time hits, they clock out and they leave, and they never make the effort to have the opportunity to be more of the team. They just function as a solo practitioner. It's very hard to work with them. Even if they are a good nurse, it's just hard to work with them because there's nothing that you can really relate to. There's no camaraderie there. And it's just a difficult environment for those that don't put forth the effort to be a part of the team rather than physically being there. I think you have great advice. Like I said before, I'm still going to stand on it. We should have had this conversation a long time ago and would love to chat more, as Holly already mentioned. But one of the good things about my question is I get to ask the same one to everybody on here. We love to hear the answers. We've heard all sorts of crazy answers and a lot of really good heartwarming ones. But is there a certain moment in your career that really changed you? Changed who you are, maybe changed the trajectory of what you're doing, a person or a place or an event that really impacted you as an individual?
Yeah. So I was a trauma nurse and I was 100% staffing. And that was my focus. It was earlier in my career. So I was still learning, getting comfortable in all my knowledge and skills and whatnot. And our organization had recently gone through a reorg and a restructure. I work night shifts. I love night shifts. And my medical director came in and sat down next to me. He's like, hey, Courtney, let's have a talk. And I'm like, oh, okay. I immediately went to, okay, what mistake did I make? What happened? Where is this going? And I sat down and he looked at me. He's like, trauma. And we had a conversation about that. He's like, so injury prevention. We need someone to fill this. It's a mandate by the American College of Surgeons, so we have to have somebody, and we want you to do it. And I was like, oh, I know nothing about injury prevention. I am the way wrong person for you. This is not my specialty. I am a trauma nurse. I love taking care of patients. I love doing this. I am not injury prevention. I know nothing about it. And he looked at me. He goes, no, Courtney, you're good for this role. You'll go to school. You can learn all about that injury prevention. He goes, I can help you do that, but you need to do this. And I go, no. He looked at me. He goes, no, you're doing this. And I'm like, okay. But the way that changed my life and still reflects is someone saw something in me I didn't see in myself. And someone had confidence in me that I didn't have in myself and helped me move those barriers. And after I did go back to school and realized, yes, I could do this, and then realized I like doing this, having that, sometimes that blind trust in my leaders. You joke all the time, if I'm hurt, don't let him touch me. Or if I'm hurt, call this one in to take care of me. We all do that as ER nurses. And he was one that all of us would let operate on us. And I'm like, I trust him with my patients. Why do I not trust him in his recommendations for my own career? And so I think being open to that was huge, because I never would have gone down the injury prevention, or I know for a fact I would not have, had it not been for his support, his leadership, the support of my director at that time to say, yep, you're doing this and this is how we're going to help you. And then recognizing that that's the type of leader, that's the type of charge nurse, preceptor I want to be for my other people, to get them to make some of those hard decisions that ultimately, in my experience, can really drive them further than they could ever see themselves being driven.
That's awesome. That's great leadership advice. We need to just turn this whole thing into a how to grow as a leader podcast.
Well, I'm far from an expert on that one. I am still learning every day in that one.
I think all of us are. But no, that's really great. Definitely impacted you, and the ripple effect is that it's impacted so many others through that conversation as well. So kudos to him and to you for trusting him.
Well, we're going to segue right into these rapid fire questions. And really the reason we ask them on the podcast is because while we love hearing all of the things that you're doing in your career and profession and impacting nurses and trauma patients and all of the things, we also know that that does not encapsulate you as a person as a whole. So these are just some ways we can hear kind of from the other side of you. So what would you be doing if you were not in your current role? Like, I could do anything outside of healthcare. What would you do? What would you do?
Being a lawyer, challenging the status quo, pushing beyond that. Or, I waited tables all through high school, through college, loved it. And that's like always I joke, I go, my peace out job, I'm just going to go wait tables again. Because I'm like, when it comes to it, I can make sure I can get your medium well steak there and all of that and your drink. And so being able to make people happy and sustain them in a different light. But I think law school could be kind of interesting.
I feel such a close bond to your answers. One, I had thought about going to law school at one point just because I always liked to argue the other side. Like, I always thought, like, if someone brings me an issue, I'm like, I would like to argue opposed. And I was like, well, so that doesn't always go well when I first meet people. So I have to, that's something I've learned over the course of time. But I was a waitress when I was in high school and even into college. And the manager owner that I worked for, I still run into him now. And I tell him all the time, every time I see him, I tell him, I say, Rusty, I'm so glad that you had me as a waitress, because I know nursing school prepared me, but I think waiting tables and having people ask for some often ridiculous requests, I'm like, you don't know how well that prepared me for nursing, how to like help people kind of level set their expectations and requests and be like, I'm sorry, that's not on the hospital menu today. I could go back and do that again. I think I would actually have more fun on this side. So that's awesome. Well, I have some other favorites to ask you about. Can you just tell us, is there like a favorite book or a quote that kind of helps motivate you? Yeah, either one of those.
Um, I never get the exact words right, but it's an Albert Einstein quote. And he says, if you give me 60 minutes to solve a problem, what I need to do is spend the first 55 minutes figuring out the question, and then the next 5 minutes solving that question, and then you'll solve the problem. But it really resonates with me, being proactive instead of always reactive, thinking through your ideas. But that quote always sticks with me.
Mm. And I took it to, like, when you said it, I'm like, sometimes I think I hear a question or maybe I assess a situation and I see like, oh, this is the problem. And then I go to fix it, not fully understanding what the question was. So then I've spent all this time trying to like solve something that actually was not the point. So, yeah, if I spent more time being like, is this the question? Is this what's being asked? And then, then jump to the conclusion or the answer versus being like, oh, yeah, I obviously understand the question. I like that. I'm going to find that and put that somewhere to as a gentle reminder. All right, favorite movie, TV show, or binge-worthy series? Because everybody's always looking for the next one.
I love the National Treasure series. I think they're funny with Nicolas Cage. It's lighthearted. You can turn it on anytime.
Courtney, be honest, did Holly put you up to that?
No, not at all.
She
Um,
is the world's biggest Nicolas Cage fan, and she talks about him all
Oh,
the time.
we're connecting here big time.
yeah, it's something that it makes me cringe a little bit because there are a lot of cringe moments in Nicolas Cage's long career, but there's also a ton of like, yeah, that's awesome. And yes, National Treasure is one of those awesome ones that I can hold up as like, see, he has done good work. There's some others, but yes, I love that one.
See,
And
I like the history of the National Treasure. As I enjoy history. I like reading historical fiction and that kind of thing. And so I like that and find it fascinating with the mystery part. So like solving the mystery stuff. And then it's just good, lighthearted TV. Nothing too serious.
I love that. Yes. I mean, I couldn't like that answer more. That's true, as Michael would point out. All right, favorite musical artist or a song that like, just kind of resonates with you. Who are you listening to?
You know, I honestly don't get to pick the radio stations anymore. My children dominate that. They dominate what also plays. We listen to various different types of music. I'm a good old school Journey fan. I love Journey.
I love Journey too. I do like a good classic rock vibe, but to your point, I listen to like some current stuff. So yeah, there's a smattering. Some of it is forced upon me. I will, if someone recommends something, I will listen to it. And sometimes I'm like, well, that was one and done. And then other times I'm like, well, I'm glad that they recommended that. So I don't know. I'll probably be pulling up my Journey playlist later on because you've said it. So, love that. Okay. Hobbies or self-care go-to, I should say something that helps you like reset because you're doing a lot of things. You're taking care of a lot of people, and I'm sure you're keeping professionally very busy. But what helps you kind of reset?
So if I'm resetting because I am stressed out and need to get rid of energy, it's cleaning. I'm a cleaner. I am not the exercise, workout, runner type person. I chase around three little boys. But really, when it comes to it, what I like to do is I like to read. Get me into a good mystery or psychological thriller, and I can get out of my life and into the life of said character. That works great for me.
Hmm. We are a match set, and I didn't know it until now. But yeah, I love to read. I have my library card and library list on the ready. I constantly put in books, like I constantly reserve them. I've always, if I'm traveling through the airport, I'm like creeping on people's books. I'm like, what are you reading? I'm always on the lookout for what might possibly spark my interest. And I would say that I do clean when I'm trying to get rid of stress, but it's mostly I tell my husband, I'm like, look, if I'm cleaning like real actively, you should probably make sure that I'm not really pissed about something, because I'm like, I tend to like mad clean versus if I'm like dawdling and cleaning, then that's one version that might be me trying to waste time. But but if I'm like in it and scrubbing you might want to do a little pulse check and make sure that I'm emotionally okay. So, oh my goodness.
So what book did you just finish? What was the most recent one you finished?
Let me think. So it was called
Tables have turned. I like this.
No, I do as well. So my last book that I read, it was actually, so I read The Women by Kristen Hanna. So if that has ever been recommended to you, it's actually
it's awesome.
It's awesome. It's about a nurse, and I found it fascinating. And then I read A Thousand Splendid Suns by, the last name's Hosseini, and honestly, it was kind of a hard, not difficult to read, but it was a hard subject matter. So I will say that. And then I like you, I like a good like mystery. And I will say the book that I've been recommending to people is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And
it's on my list.
It is. Oh,
that one is on my list.
I rented it from the library, but I liked it so much, I actually bought it as like, because I was like, this is one's going on the shelf. So, wow. Way to flip the script, Courtney. I love that. But I'm glad to know you have it on your list, and I cannot wait to hear once you read it. We'll have to have like a book club situation at the end. So,
absolutely. At conference.
Yes, I can't wait. Well, here's the thing, Courtney. People are probably going to want to reach out to you. So where could our audience members, if they wanted to reach out to you, where might they be able to do that
at? My LinkedIn profile is probably my best. I am not big on social media. I find it distracting sometimes. It's too much. So I'm a simplistic girl. Email also works fabulous. LinkedIn and email are probably the best.
Awesome. Well, we will include those in our blog for this episode.
Well, as I'm just sitting on the sidelines listening to the book talk here, as you both have mentioned, we do have an upcoming BCN conference. It'll be in Colorado Springs. I look forward to Holly giving Courtney her book that she bought. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say, Holly, you can gift that to her at the conference. Courtney, I appreciate you being on this podcast, though. It was really nice chatting with you and getting to know you some more and learning from you. I've heard you speak, I've heard you teach, but just getting to know you more, getting to know some of the things that drive you and motivate you, and the way that you've been such an inspiration to so many is really appreciated. And we appreciate the time that you took to sit down and talk with us today. So thank you for all that you're doing in the world of emergency and trauma nursing. It's really great.
Well, thank you.
Well, I want to take this time to thank Courtney for joining us for this episode of BCN and Friends. We appreciate you sharing your perspectives, experiences, and kind of that team-based mentality with us. Your desire to pursue knowledge is simply a conduit for the education of others, and you are impacting lives across your community, state, and nation. We truly appreciate you and all that you are doing. And to all of our listeners, stay tuned as we bring you new, insightful episodes of BCN and Friends. If you have an episode suggestion, we'd love to hear from you. Send us a message to bcn@bcn.org. I'm Holly Briggs, here with Michael Dexter, and on behalf of the entire BCN team, we thank and celebrate you for all that you're doing as professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, we are out.